Inauspicious date, if ever there was one. There are many ways to look at the unfolding American election which Joe Biden likes to think he's won. The question that's worth asking now, though, is why it was so close. Over the next few weeks, we'll have plenty of time to explore other aspects of the election. But for now, we already know one thing. It was close. Whoever ultimately wins, this election will have been won on razor-thin margins. It was so close that Biden barely eked out his so-called win. That makes absolutely no sense to the rest of the world. They want to know how Trump managed to get even half of the vote. They have been fed by their compliant media, cages, kids in them, raids, purges, Gestapo's disappearing people in the streets, rank incompetence, escalating authoritarianism, open fascism, or mass death from COVID. People wonder how anyone can vote for a president after all that. The thinking is that the election should never have been close, not even remotely. It should have been a blowout. It would have been in any remotely sane or reasonable society, but it wasn't. It was barely a victory at all, which is mind-boggling to most of the rest of the world. Now, certain Americans will already dispute this on two counts. First, that it wasn't close. But margins within 2 or 3% are pretty close, and many of the margins deciding this election are within 1%. That is undeniably close. It's just a fact. A certain kind of American, especially the white liberal, feels the need to cheerlead their way out of messes with positive thinking. But that only leads them to deny factual reality. This election was close. Very, very close. The second count of objection will probably be, but so what? We won! Woo-hoo! Even if that ultimately turns out to be true, what the world has that America doesn't have, especially America's liberals, is a high enough bar, we won, never mind the margin, is precisely why their country is an endless mess and they never really get around to solving their problems. It doesn't do to be so unquestioning and uncritical, especially when it comes to the most crucial election in modern times. So these foreigners wonder how roughly half of America still voted for Trump and the GOP. They come out with things like, haven't they learnt anything? How does half a nation still back fascists, supremacists, abusers of power, incompetents and fools? Sure, Republican voters live in bubbles of disinformation. Yes, gerrymandering and voter suppression were as rampant as ever. But the Democrats knew about those. They're not as ever. But the Democrats knew about those. They're not a surprise, or shouldn't have been. Those, one assumes, were taken into account in the Democrats' strategy leading up to this election and taken into account by pollsters when predicting the Biden landslide that never was. First, there's COVID. America has the world's worst COVID outcomes by a long way. Trump's administration left America the only nation on earth without a COVID strategy. So you'd expect those hit hardest by COVID to have backed anyone but Trump. Yet precisely the opposite was true, at least among whites. Places hit hardest by COVID voted more for Trump. Then there's the matter of the economy. The economy didn't do better under Trump. The American economy is just as broken as it has been for decades now. Real incomes are still cratering. People's savings are still non-existent. The American dream died long ago. The idea of upward mobility is a distant memory. America is now a society of the downwardly mobile. Yet none of that seemed to swing the electorate much in the Democrats' favour. Then there's the matter of social structure, a society's class system. America's reverting to being a kind of caste society. The middle class is still imploding. The working class is still cratering. Working class is still cratering. America is still becoming a society of one giant underclass beneath a tiny elite of super-rich and their lieutenants. Half of the American people work what is euphemistically called low-wage service jobs. Given all that, you'd think the Democrats would have made inroads with the working class. But they didn't. Trump's share of the white working class appears to have been as high as it was in 2016, if not higher. There's the matter of the social contract, too. America doesn't have one, at least not in modern terms. In fact, it has the absence of one. If you're European, Canadian, even Asian, you get healthcare, retirement, a pension, except the right, of course, to carry guns and wave Bibles around. America doesn't have a modern social contract, which is the key reason America is now an impoverished society. People have to pay monopolists eye-watering sums for things that should be basic human rights. That's why the average American dies with $62,000 of debt. Those are numbers that should predict a revolution. Instead, Biden seems to have had almost no marginal or switching votes for the sake of social reform. These are serious and crucial matters: the economy, social structure, the social contract, and COVID. One might be forgiven for assuming that the election was, in large part, crucial matters: the economy, social structure, the social contract, and COVID. One might be forgiven for assuming that the election was, in large part, a referendum on these things. Before the election, many, if not most, thought there'd be a Biden landslide. That wasn't just pollsters, by the way. Let me add one more wrinkle to everything I've just said. When asked, Americans say that they want a decent, functioning, modern society. Pundits will repeat this line endlessly, hoping against hope for change. Something between 60 to 70% of Americans, when asked, say they want levels of inequality like Scandinavia, good retirement and pensions. So here's the glaring, gaping, terrible contradiction. They don't vote for it. They've never done so. America has never produced a solid majority in the direction of actually creating a modern, functioning society. even though that's what the majority of Americans say that's what they want when asked over and over again. Instead, they vote against it over and over again. This election hasn't broken that pattern. A tiny numerical majority of Americans backed Biden, it's true, but not an overwhelming majority. Not nearly the same number that profess to want a modern, functioning society. Biden didn't win society. Biden didn't win 2/3 of the vote. He barely won, if at all. So why do Americans say one thing and then vote for another? The answer tends to break down along racial lines. White Americans, who are the vast majority of the country, around 80% or so, say they want the public manifestations of a modern society. But when it comes time actually to vote for such things, they have never once done so in modern history. This election didn't break that pattern either. In fact, weirdly, strangely, fatally, it seems to have reinforced it. Trump's share of white voters seems to have gone up. There's a reason that white voters say they want a modern society, but no dirty, filthy people's healthcare, education, retirement. Why, their grandparents were my grandpappy's slaves. White Americans have never once backed a functioning social contract, ever, and in this election they still didn't. Now, white liberals do not want to admit that America's white majority is still badly regressive, even abusive, towards the rest of society. It doesn't want to live in a modern society. That's why when I raise questions like this, white liberals get angry at me. They do not understand. They are very much in the minority in their social group, and that's why America is still so backwards. They'll get angry at me, predictably, when I say this. It's absolutely jaw-dropping to the entire rest of the world that half America still voted for Trump after what they perceive as all the nightmarish horrors of the last 4 years. Even if Biden ends up winning, America's sent one message to the rest of the world loud and clear. About half the American people, especially white Americans, take no issue with the appalling problems in society today. They were never discussed during the Democrats' campaign. No questions were asked of the Democratic contender by any of the debate moderators. Their entire campaign, in no sense, depended on a discussion of these matters. This election should have been a referendum on all those things. To the rest of the world, it was a test for America. Sadly, America failed. The answers, though, are as obvious as they are crystal clear. America, they say, is a divided country. What they won't say is that what divides it is the same old demons: hate, racism, fascism, brutality, violence, stupidity, and ignorance. Until white Americans begin understanding just how badly their group is riven by such afflictions, America can make no progress.